think that there are two main things that are going to happen relatively soon in this race.
Okay.
One of them is on the Democratic side, Roy Cooper decides yes or no, get into the race. I think anyone else who's thinking on the Democratic side about getting into this race really is waiting on Roy Cooper.
Hi, and welcome to the Debrief. Take a look at these pictures. This has been a big story we've been talking about all week. This is flooding in Alamance County, Orange County, some of those areas. Carolina Journal's own Jacob Edmonds got these pictures here. We're going to be talking a lot about that and a lot of other stories happening here in North Carolina. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. We're going to be talking about some of this flooding. What is this damage going to really mean to folks out there? Right now, Mebane is on the water is off there. They're on bottled water. And their businesses are closed. They're really dealing with a lot right now. So we're going to be talking about that, plus a lot of other things going on. Governor Stein is busy vetoing and signing legislation. We've got Medicaid expansion to talk about, plus, of course, Tom Tillis. Joining us now to bring in all of these stories that we've been talking about today, we have executive branch reporter Teresa Opeka for the Carolina Journal, and, of course, CJ's managing editor David Larson, and senior political analyst Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation. A lot going on. That is some crazy, crazy high water going on in eastern North Carolina, or actually central North Carolina right now. Governor Stein was out there talking about it. It's actually almost in your backyard. You were experiencing some of that. David, tell us about what's been happening.
Absolutely. I spend most of my time in Orange and Alamance counties, so those are the two counties that were most affected. It came by surprise, really, because it was a tropical storm, and to us at least, we weren't expecting. I don't pay as close attention to the weather updates as my wife does, but yeah, hit Mebane and Hillsborough, which we're often in both of those cities. So our daycare's in Mebane, and that's shut. We don't know till when, so we're kind of watching our kids. The water's out. Hillsborough, we got our water back last night, so we were on a boil-only notice, but yeah, it was a pretty dramatic scene. A lot of people started contacting each other. I thought, it reminded me a little bit of people were talking during Helene, that really the first responders are often just the people right around you, the organizations, your family, your friends, your church, and that's what seemed to happen here. Is I'm sure the government's going to have a big response that's going to be necessary to really fill in. But people started saying, "Oh, our power's out. Can we come over and warm up our dinner?" So we're like, "Okay." And then, my wife's parents live in Mebane, and their power was out and their water was out, and so just all these people started contacting about how they can help each other, and all those little group chats, for your neighborhood and for your church, all turn into ways of seeing who needs what and who can help and who has power and who has water. So it was a pretty interesting few days there. I think it's starting to come back. Most services, although last night, we did get a little more flooding, a little more rain. It wasn't as bad as Chantel was on Sunday.
So where does it stand right now? What are you hearing? You have water back. Other areas of the community don't?
Yes, I think Mebane is not going to, maybe for a little while longer, but Hillsborough has it back. And Saxapahaw, which is a little bit further down, they, from those pictures, I don't know exactly their status right now, but it looks like along the river they were in pretty rough shape. And I know Chapel Hill also got flooding in their downtown that was affecting a lot of businesses. Mebane businesses were told to stay closed for the foreseeable future and not to use water in the downtown area. And so, yeah, a lot of people are trying to find ways to work from home and take care of their kids that were in daycares like ours. And but I think it should be something that the state funds are there for disaster recovery, and there's people trying to fill in and help where they can.
But that's the question, right? Because we talk about this all the time, that we have to protect that rainy day fund, because these rainy days happen all the time.
A literal rainy day.
Right? A literal rainy day. So now we have, Medicaid expansion to deal with. We've got lots of competing priorities. At any minute, the, floodgates open. Tell me what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So on Medicaid, well, first I wanted to touch on some
Sure.
big news that I saw that just came
Yeah.
this morning, that North Carolina was
Oh, yeah, of
found
course.
to be the top state for business. The CNBC does this ranking, and a lot of people put a bit of stock into it, and just it's fun to see who rises to the top. We've in the last 5 years have either been the winner 2 of the years, or now third year out of those 5, and the other 2 years we've been runner-up. So we have
That's
been
huge.
dominating that list, really.
Yeah.
And so they mentioned a lot of things. Our jobs. We're number 3 in the economy section. Florida and Texas edged us out, and did very well in all these other sections. The 2 worries they did have, as you mentioned, hurricane recovery and Medicaid.
Okay.
And so those are 2 areas that they see as potential hiccups for our state in the coming years. So Helene, there's going to be a lot of work to recover from that. And then, as you said, Medicaid,
Right.
The expansion that we had, added about 670 or so thousand people to the Medicaid rolls in our state. And the one big beautiful bill in D.C. that just passed, that is going to make the state have to reconsider a lot of that. I mean, I'm sure Mitch maybe has a lot more of the details on that, but I think it's about $4.4 billion that they have to. That's not a small amount out of a 30 billion-ish.
Right.
That's maybe 12%. I don't know what that
about
is of the budget. They probably have to return to the drawing table on some of that to figure out how to make those numbers work.
Mitch, could this really unwind all the progress Republican lawmakers have made over the last decade?
I'm not sure that it would rewind all of it, but it certainly would place a dent in some of the things that they want to do. And I'm guessing that right about now, leaders in the State House and Senate are thinking, wow, we should have wrapped up that budget and gone home so we wouldn't have to deal with all this. But remember, they left town at the end of June without finishing a new state budget, and basically already knew at that time that Congress might do something that would change the whole Medicaid equation, but decided not to do anything about it, and basically said, I'm not quoting him directly, but this is sort of a paraphrase of what Senator Phil Berger said at the time was, they talk about doing lots of stuff in D.C. and hardly ever do it.
Right.
So let's wait until they actually do something, and then we can address it. Well, now they have. They've passed that one big, beautiful bill, and it does have changes for Medicaid. And as things stand now, the North Carolina law that expanded Medicaid said, well, if you change the federal match or change these other things, Medicaid expansion goes away.
Okay.
So if the General Assembly does nothing, it seems very likely that the Medicaid expansion, which covers that 670,000 plus people, goes away. Those people go off the Medicaid rolls. I don't know that there's anyone who actually expects that that's going to happen.
Okay.
The John Locke Foundation would probably lobby for it to happen because we lobbied against Medicaid expansion in the first place and said it was a bad thing. But if they're going to stay, if the people who have been added to Medicaid are going to stay, you're either going to have some sort of change in the benefits.
Okay.
Perhaps the work requirement knocks some of those folks out of it. But you've got to have a combination of some change in the benefits and also a change in the funding.
Okay.
And right now what happens is there's a 90% federal government coverage of the expansion, 10% is a state match, but the 10% is not coming from the general taxes. It's an assessment that's been made on the hospitals, with the hospitals then using that to help draw down federal money. So it's supposed to be kind of a wash, sort of an accounting gimmick that doesn't mean that means that the state really doesn't have to pay anything to get this money. Now if state taxpayers are on the hook, not just for the 10%, but for 35% or so, that's a major hit, billions of dollars, as David was alluding to, and that's going to make a major change in what North Carolina can do with its budget. It would crowd out funding for education, health and human services, prisons, all of those things.
Right.
Plus, it would certainly cause a dent in any plans for tax reform. Right now we have several tax cuts that are already scheduled to come into place, and more that the Senate wants to do. Those plans would certainly have to come off the table if you have to pay hundreds of millions, if not billions more, to deal with Medicaid.
Sure. What's Governor Stein saying?
So what he was saying, and it's like it's going to be a $32 billion hole is
Okay.
what it would leave for North
$32
Carolina over the
billion.
next decade.
Wow.
And the work
Over a
requirements
decade.
itself
Yeah.
would be about 225,000 or so would lose their benefits as a result of the new work requirements. I think they have to work up to 80 hours a month.
Right.
is
Okay.
what
So
the
that
new-
brings us down to 500,000 people if they decide not
Right,
to do it.
right. The remaining would be for the rest.
Still a ton. Yeah.
Sure. So what he said, talked to reporters after a council state meeting this week that they're going to have to get creative.
Okay.
He in his office, along with legislators, about what
That's
they need to
the
do.
word he used.
That's the word he
Okay.
used. He's going to have to get creative. And he said he was talking to Senate Leader Phil Berger, and he is on board to do whatever it takes to protect the state's people. And they said that Berger said that they can adapt to whatever Congress passes. That
Okay.
was his wording that Governor
He seems
Stein
confident.
used.
Yeah, he seems confident. Is this a political problem for them? I mean, a lot of these members just voted to expand Medicaid, and they're right back at the table.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be a challenge. I mean,
Sure.
Governor Stein's putting a good face on it that, hey, we can come up with a deal. I'm guessing that he didn't want to come out and say, well, if these darn Republicans will do something, I can get a deal. He's probably trying to manifest that they will come up with some sort of good deal that will appeal to everyone.
Right.
But the devil will come in the details,
Right.
and we know that Phil Berger and Destin Hall are not going to want to set back some of the economic gains that they've made for Medicaid expansion
Sure.
to protect that, while this is being touted as a big bipartisan win and the Republicans and Democrats coming together to do Medicaid expansion. There were a lot of people among the majority
yeah.
party Republican Party that said, yeah, well, okay, we'll do this if Phil Berger.
They were doing it because the Biden administration kicked in the money to do it,
right,
right?
right. There
I mean,
was
they
there
were
was
doing
that.
it.
There was that,
Yeah.
and then
And there was also the requirement that it would, in the bill, that was like, if it drops below where it's not 90% match anymore, this is going to go away.
Right. So that was
So
the poison pill for it.
that it goes
for
away.
most of them.
But there
Yeah.
were a lot of people only on the Republican side who only did this because their leaders told them to.
Sure.
And didn't really like it, and are probably not too thrilled right now that they're having to look at saving this program that they didn't really want in the first place.
Right.
If the whole expansion population went away, I mean, it's being touted from its supporters as, oh, this is going to lead to deaths and all
Right,
kinds of
right.
destruction and chaos. Basically, it would just lead you to where you were beforehand.
18 months ago or
Yeah, I
whatever
mean,
it was.
it'd
Yeah.
be a bunch of people who aren't on Medicaid. They either will go back to private insurance if they left private insurance, or they'll be uninsured, which is its own problem. But remember, most of the Medicaid expansion population is working age, able-bodied adults,
Right.
who most of whom weren't on health insurance just because they said it wasn't worthwhile for them. I
Sure.
mean, it's an expensive thing, and if you don't think you're going to need it,
Right.
why pay for it? And that's not necessarily the
Sure.
best thinking, but it is an option for people out there
Right.
that if they don't think they're going to need insurance now because they're in their 20s or their 30s, they don't have
Sure.
families and kids to take care of, that's the choice they make. And if we lost that Medicaid expansion population, we would go back to the way things were before Medicaid expansion. It wouldn't be death and destruction
Right.
and chaos.
And the people who were on the regular Medicaid population, that doesn't change for them. Is that correct?
That's my understanding,
yeah.
because the federal government is not reducing the 2/3 that it
Right.
was
So
paying
the
for the
expansion
traditional Medicaid
population is the only group we're really talking about potentially.
And it adds
gonna
up to
make a
3
change.
million people, or a little over 3 million in North Carolina total are on Medicaid, and that includes the expansion people at this point.
Okay. Okay. That makes
In a
sense.
state of 9 million,
Right.
that's
That's a lot of people.
it's a third of people.
Yeah.
But in terms of what you said about a political problem,
Right.
even if these people find another, you have 660,000 people suddenly
Sure.
go back to whatever they were doing before, there's still the political question of what kind of an effect does that have in a midterm year
Sure.
coming up?
Absolutely.
And often, the party who has the president in power, they're already a little nervous because some things might be, going downstream and hitting them locally, getting blamed for certain things. That often happens to the party who's got the president. So they probably don't want 660,000 people angry at them, if they can avoid that. Not that they'll all have been Republican voters, obviously, but it's possible that even a couple percentage
Sure.
points can make a
Especially
big
here
difference.
in North Carolina.
Yeah, and it's definitely a difference to not give people a government
Right.
benefit in the first place versus taking it away
Yeah.
after you've given it to them and within a couple of years of giving it to them.
Yeah.
But what are their options? They have raise taxes, take away the benefit, find some other
if they have
things
to pay
cut.
for it, if they have to pay for it, slow the tax cuts and reduce teacher raises, they're going to make a lot more enemies doing that than they would be potentially reshaping the expansion program or ending it. Very interesting. So something else we're really watching now is Governor Stein. So he has a ton of bills on his desk, has since the General Assembly went back home. If you've been seeing your members there, you can ask them a little bit about these. Governor Stein has vetoed some big bills, vetoed 14 so far. Teresa, I know you've been watching this really closely. Here are the bills that the governor has vetoed so far. He's signed a lot too. It's been an interesting process to watch. But the big one that we're watching also is the Privacy Protection Act. Governor Stein vetoed the Privacy Protection Act. That bill is intended to protect you and I if we donate to, say, a Planned Parenthood or a Right to Life group or, whatever. If you donate to a private nonprofit, so the law already says that your identity is protected. What this did was put a little teeth in it. So it has penalties for any bureaucrat, government official who tries to compel a nonprofit into giving up their donor list. So it provides a little bit of protection for those. Teresa, what did Governor Stein say about why he decided to veto this?
Much of what Governor Cooper said in 2021 when he vetoed a similar measure. He called it dark money, that it's protecting people with dark money, but as you say, that's not the case.
Okay. Now, so they're talking about election money, right?
Yeah. And this bill has nothing to do with that.
Okay.
I mean, it completely carves out anything to do with election finance. The election finance laws would remain exactly the same.
Okay.
This is about donors to nonprofit groups.
Okay.
Like our parent organization, the John Locke Foundation, or as you mentioned, any group on the political right or political left.
Yeah.
This has been an issue that went back to I believe the 50s.
58.
50s, and attempts in deep southern states to get the donor list for the NAACP. And so this is the type of thing that's been advocated for years and years, is to protect donor privacy. It doesn't have anything to do with elections or dark money. So either Governor Stein doesn't know what the bill does, or he's just using the words dark money because it sounds good.
Okay, all right, because this is an argument we've heard a lot over the years, that this is a dark money bill, but it really has deep history.
Yes, the case he was talking about was 1958. I was just reading about it in the article that you wrote.
Sure.
Just clicking around the links, and it was Alabama versus the NAACP in 1958, and they were trying to get the donor lists for obviously intimidate these people to not give to an organization, but that shows the kind of thing that can happen.
Sure.
Why this sort of law would be necessary is because under this kind of bill, whatever a government actor in Alabama that was trying to get that would have civil penalties, and so because it would be tempting to find out, who are our who's funding our political enemies? Can we get that list of names? Can we make that public? Can we isolate them, put pressure on them? But it already is illegal because of that case and because of state law.
Right.
But if kind of like with our there's other laws that just need a little bit of teeth. I was thinking of our transparency laws and things like that. That the law is there, but it does help to give something a little teeth sometimes. Just so, I mean, Stein's saying that this is new and will affect dark money and that kind of thing, but it's nothing that's not already the law. It's more about the teeth.
Well, it's about holding government officials responsible if they try to use their position, their power, for political purposes.
Yes, and we have seen problems with officials trying to use this information. We saw it in California long before she was a presidential candidate and before she was a U.S. Senator. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General in California and was involved in efforts there to try to get information from donors to particular groups that people on the political left didn't like. So it is something that can happen. People who are supporters of left-leaning causes should be happy to see this, so that Republicans who are activists who want to go after left-wing groups can't go in and publicize who's giving to left of center causes.
Sure.
It's the type of thing that protects people who want to donate to nonprofit groups across the political spectrum. It's something that should be palatable and acceptable to all, and it doesn't have anything to do with dark money.
Sure, sure. So what's the next step? This goes back to the General Assembly?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And we'll have to see if they have enough votes for a veto override, and like they don't have the supermajority any longer. So
Sure.
it'll be interesting to see about those and other bills that he has vetoed.
Okay, so they have a supermajority in the Senate, and they have one
Right.
short in the House. They need
Right.
one member
Right.
from the Democratic Party to show up in the House for them.
They need a new Tricia Cotham to
Yeah.
show up.
Yeah.
Well, and if you look at the 14 bills that the governor has vetoed, I believe 5 or 6 of them are bills that had 0 Democratic support.
Okay.
No Democratic member voted for them, so it's unlikely that any of those would pass. But there are 2 or 3 others that had one House Democrat voted
Sure.
for it, so it's possible that that bill could pass if the House Democrat sticks with his or her initial vote rather than supporting the governor. And then there are a handful of out there that had multiple Democrats supporting them.
Right.
I believe that Power Reduction
Sure.
Act, the one that was getting rid of the interim carbon reduction goal.
The gender one as well.
Yeah, those had 8, 10, 11 House Democrats who voted for them, so it'll be interesting to see whether they stick with them on that. And there was one bill that was vetoed. This is one that had some changes to it initially. It was one thing and it got changed a little bit. It had unanimous support in the state Senate.
Right.
And still a number of House Democrats supported it. So it'll be interesting to see if what happens this time is similar to what happens when Roy Cooper was in office,
Yes.
where the Democrats who voted for something the first time around go, oh, nope, now it's vetoed, I got to go the other way.
Sure.
Or if they stick with their initial vote.
He held that General Assembly Democratic caucus pretty tightly. Do you think that falls to Josh Stein, or do you think he's even really trying to the level that Cooper had a stranglehold on the votes in that caucus? Do you think Stein does?
It remains to be seen.
Sure.
Remember that Stein's political apparatus is Cooper's political apparatus.
Sure.
It's the same people. So if they want to employ the same type of thing, threatening people, bringing in legislators and saying, here's who you're going to be running against
Right.
in your next
Here's your primary, yeah.
That remains to be seen.
Okay.
Josh Stein, up until he started vetoing bills, had been presented as being kind of much more amenable to working with the General Assembly. He even got some praise from Republican lawmakers about how his staff would talk to them, unlike Roy Cooper's staff. And so it remains to be seen whether he's now sort of going to be turning to the Cooper hardball tactics,
Very
or
interesting.
if he just says, okay, I'll win the ones that I can win and let the other ones go.
Because that Cooper, heavy or very active veto pen was a fairly new thing historically.
Right.
So it looks like maybe Stein is going to take that route. But before Cooper, the veto didn't even exist
Till
a
the
few
90s,
times. A few terms before, and then when it did, it wasn't used nearly as much as Cooper did. I think he had more than all the previous
Yeah, I
people
think-
combined.
Right.
Yeah, more than twice as many.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see if Stein's sort of rate of veto is going to keep up with that.
Very interesting.
The only other period, other than Cooper, when we saw this many vetoes was the 2-year period when Beverly Perdue was governor, a Democrat, right at the beginning of the Republicans being in control of the General Assembly. In her first 2 years in office, when Democrats were still in charge, I think she vetoed 2 bills.
Oh, wow.
And then during the 2 years of the end of her term and the beginning of the Republican control of the General Assembly, I think she vetoed 17 bills. So that was the only other period other than the Cooper years when you saw a bunch of vetoes.
So it might just be about if there's same party in both
I think
or
that's
not.
a lot of it. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
it's
Anything surprising coming from
I
Governor
was just
Stein?
going to say that he was amenable. This kind of flew under the radar. No one's
Sure.
really talked about it. So a reporter asked after a council state meeting why he signed Senate Bill 442, which is the Parents Protection Act, into
Okay.
law. What that does, it protects parents and caretakers from being charged with, or actually it stipulates they cannot be charged with being a felony or a misdemeanor child abuse for raising their children according to their biological sex.
Okay.
And what he told the reporter, told all of us after the meeting on Tuesday, well, I feel that the parents have the right to raise their child as they see fit, which is, kind of surprising
It's
considering
interesting that's surprising.
yeah, that he voted against the bill with the genders, the two genders, male and female, and going along other party lines with the way the left sees issues like that. So that was a surprising bill. No one's really talked about it, but he did sign that into law.
Interesting. All right. So it means that parents can't be accused of abuse for not conforming to their child's, if their child wants a different gender.
Right. They would be charged with a misdemeanor or a felony charge.
Very interesting.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's encouraging, certainly. All right. We'll see what's going on with that. This Senate race. This is a big one, right? We've all been talking about Senator Tillis. He was on CNN this week, and of course, Jake Tapper
quoted a Carolina Journal column. That was kind
quoted
of
By you.
Carolina Journal, which is Carolina
Along
Journal.
with CNBC for
And
the
CNBC.
for
Got
number
a little
one
national recognition
right.
this week. I like that.
And Mitch was on C-SPAN, so
And
that's
Mitch
all
was
the
on-
C.
It's a trifecta.
We are so much more important. All right, well, tell me what you think. So I'll actually go straight to you because of this column, right? Senator Tillis is out. Don Davis says he's stepping in. What do you think? Maybe stepping in. He's considering.
Yeah, I think that there are two main things that are going to happen relatively soon in this race.
Okay.
One of them is on the Democratic side, Roy Cooper decides yes or no, get into the race. I think anyone else who's thinking on the Democratic side about getting into this race really is waiting on Roy Cooper. You mentioned Don Davis is thinking about it, the congressman from the Eastern District, the only real swing district right now in North Carolina, is thinking about it. Wiley Nichols already in. He's been talking about it ever since he got gerrymandered out of his district. And but Nick, I think everyone assumes that if Cooper gets in, Nichols gets out, and will run for something else. There are some other names that might be floated out there.
Rachel
Hunt.
Yeah.
Someone has said Dan McCready, the former congressional candidate, because he has a lot of money he can throw into this race. But all of those people are waiting on Roy Cooper.
Right.
Roy Cooper doesn't get in, then you might see those names and maybe even some others.
Okay.
You say, okay, well, now it's really open, and the former governor's not in. So that's the main decision number one. I think main decision number two is on the other side. Does Donald Trump say something one way or another about who he wants to be the candidate? You've heard the name Laura Trump,
of course,
who lives in Florida, doesn't even live in North Carolina, but she is the president's. She is the president's daughter-in-law. Is from Wilmington, went to NC State, so does have some ties to North Carolina. If she gets in, you would almost certainly assume that's going to be Donald Trump's choice, and that'll probably limit how many other people would want to get into this race. If it's not Laura Trump, the people, I think, all of the folks who are involved in Republican politics and might get involved in a race for Senate are wondering, okay, what's Trump going to do? Because no one wants to be in the same situation as the people who were running the Pat McCrory and Mark Walker campaigns were during the last Senate race, where these are viable candidates, decent shot to win the nomination, and then Donald Trump comes in and says, no, Ted Budd's the candidate, and that ended basically the McCrory,
same thing.
And that ended the Walker and McCrory campaigns, and McDowell gets his nod in that congressional race, and so that ended things. So I think people are waiting on the Republican side to see what, if anything, is Donald Trump going to say, and if not, then you might start seeing other people getting involved in that race as well. We've heard Michael Whatley's name. We've heard about half of the House delegation have been floated out there, including people who are fairly new, like Pat Harrigan. And so those names are out there. We might even see some other names. One name that I heard potentially, who we haven't heard on the political scene for a while, but does have ties to Republicans and the North Carolina political history, Jim Kane, the former ambassador to Denmark, who used to work for Helms years ago. Someone said he's thinking about it. So all of these will really depend, I think, on what, if anything, Donald Trump doesn't do. Probably the worst case scenario for a Republican is you think, okay, Donald Trump's not going to get involved. You back someone, you either throw your money or your time or your energy into it, and then after there are 4 or 5 candidiats, then Trump comes back and says, yeah, that's my candidate. And then everyone else will be kind of
so interesting, the power that he wields in North Carolina, right? What do you think?
It is. And I think that was some of what Mitch was getting at in his article, not to put words in his mouth, is just the power of the executive right now at the federal level. is greater than has been seen. Not even looking at the actual policies or anything like that, but also just the influence that's wielded. So if he says one way or the other, it really does have almost, it makes it de facto. This is
that's the candidate.
Because if you were to stand against him and say no, it would be pretty difficult
You'd end up
to
like Tom
keep
Tillis.
you'd end up like Tom Tillis. So I do think having that independent legislative branch and having some Congress people, senators that are willing to say, we might like Trump on however 90% of things, but we reserve the right to have different opinions than him, and to stand against him. Just because I stand against him on one or two things doesn't mean my political career should be over. So to have that kind of courage right now is difficult for people, I think, within the way the Republican Party is working. And there's probably been other eras like FDR, I think, held similar weight like that. So it's not totally unique, but it is difficult to stand against him. And Tillis was on a couple of things, and he's just like, there's not really a space for it. So not to summarize an article you wrote, but there's I don't know if that is exactly your point, or if you'd quibble with any of that.
No, it definitely fits in with that point that this is becoming increasingly common. It's certainly true on the Republican side with Donald Trump, but it's also true on the Democratic side. Not so much with Joe Biden, but certainly was true with Barack Obama, since he was seen as such a savior for the Democratic Party, that someone stepping outside what the administration says, who is of that party, is going to get really ridiculed and chased out. Tom Tillis, when he announced he wasn't going to run again, didn't name them, but he was talking about Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin as people who were willing to stand up against Democrats to help protect the filibuster, and because they did, they were pilloried, and they both ended up saying, all right, that's enough, I'm leaving.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to see what, I have my doubts that anything will come of it, but Elon Musk's America Party.
I am so curious to see what happens with that. Yes.
Because there's always attempts when you have something like this where it's difficult for anybody to kind of have an independent thought. People talk about, they throw around third parties, the No Labels Party, which Tillis would probably align fairly well with, like McCrory and Don Davis and people like that. They're in there. But I don't really know exactly what Musk's intentions are for that. One other thing too with Davis, I was just thinking, I don't know if that would even be a good idea, if that would be a good strategy really for them, to have him step in as the nominee.
I don't know that he would vote with them all the time.
He might not, so that would turn off there's a big activist base right there. But also, as Mitch said, it's the only swing district, and having that incumbent advantage, he's very well fit to kind of a purple district in his opinions. That could be a pretty difficult thing to find a replacement. They could just end up throwing away their only congressional seat, or not their only, but the one that's a swing in the state. So it doesn't necessarily seem like a good move if Cooper or somebody else. Jeff Jackson actually this week said when he asked who he would support, he said Cooper would be the right person for this. So that's interesting that he would say that, because I feel like he's probably on the inside of a lot of discussions.
I bet he is.
And
I'm sure he is.
I doubt he would say that if Cooper wasn't seriously thinking about it.
And remember, Jackson wanted to run for Senate in the past, and stepped aside when Sherry Beasley ended up being the Democrats' anointed candidate, and ran for Congress instead. And then after he got redistricted out, ran for Attorney General. So Jackson has, at least in the past, expressed some interest in serving in the U.S. Senate, and my guess is he would like to keep his name in that mix to the extent that he can, but he's not going to run against Cooper.
Sure. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us on the Debrief. Thank you to Teresa Opeka, Mitch Kokai, David Larson. Make sure you check out CarolinaJournal.com. You'll catch up with all of this, and we're going to be watching, of course, Labor Day hits. Those campaigns are going to be off and running. Filing is in December, so stick with us, and we'll be bringing you all the information as it happens. Have a great weekend. Did you learn something? Make sure you subscribe to Carolina Journal's YouTube channel and watch the Debrief every week, where we're going to be breaking down everything happening in your state government. And check out CarolinaJournal.com for the latest breaking news.